At this point, we all know the phrase,
"With great power comes
Don't
great..."
you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it.
but what happens when this great power and responsibility falls on someone who isn't ready? Miles Morales is a teenager from New York who just started high school. After packaging his bags, he says goodbye to his parents before moving into a school dormitory. Miles is very clever and creative. He enjoys painting graffiti and expressing himself through his work more than fulfilling his school obligations. Because he's intelligent, he won a scholarship in demanding elite private school, which has his parents forcing him to attend even though he doesn't want to, since he's leaving behind his old school, neighborhood, and friends. At that very moment, his father, a police officer, arrives and drives him to a school in a patrol car. During the ride, they hear a news report about Spider-Man, which annoys his father, who detests the superhero because he believes he takes jobs away from the police and makes him look ridiculous. Meanwhile, his mates risk their lives on the streets without any protection. Upon arriving at the school, Miles confesses to his father that he wants to return to the public school. However, his father replies that he's only been there for only 2 weeks and that the matter is no longer up for discussion. He warns him about the great opportunity he has and advises him not to waste it, asking if he really wants to end up like his uncle. Miles defends his Uncle Aaron, saying he's a good person, but he reproaches his father for not giving him a choice. The father firmly maintains that he has no right to decide and then remains silent. He's a smart boy, but so are his classmates. He feels frustrated because he can't seem to find his place. Everything is overwhelming for him. The homework, his teachers, and especially his father. He wants to go back to his old school with his old friends, where he had more freedom and fewer demands. But his dad is forcing him to take on this responsibility. He doesn't believe he's up to the challenge. Miles arrives late to class. In an attempt to justify his tardiness, he mentions that Einstein said time is relative. Maybe he wasn't late. Maybe they were early. Everyone looks at him seriously, except for a girl named Gwen Stacy. Miles sits next to her, and she tells him she liked his joke. Later, the physics teacher gives Miles his exam grade, which turns out to be a 0. Miles tells her that if he keeps this up, he'll have to be expelled. The teacher assures him that the only way to get all the answers wrong is if you actually know the correct ones. She then decides to change his grade to 100. And tells him that she won't let him quit. As homework, she assigns him a personal essay, which won't be about physics, but about himself and the kind of person he wants to become. After school, Miles sneaks out of his dorm to visit his Uncle Aaron, the only person who understands him. He finds him in a refuge where it's free to do what he wants and not only what he's supposed to do. They talk for a while about whether Miles has met any girls, and he mentions Gwen. The guy suggests some advice on how to win her over, telling him to approach her, put his hand on her shoulder, and greet her.
Hey.
While sketching a graffiti in his notebook, he tells Aaron about his design. When Aaron sees his design, he asks if he's painted it yet, but Miles says his father won't let him. Even so, Aaron takes him to a secret spot to paint it on a wall. There, Miles paints a graffiti with the phrase, "No expectations." Up to this point, it's clear that Miles' life is dominated by the weight of others' expectations. As a teenager approaching adulthood, he begins to realize that his true passions, art and music, clash with what his father wants for him. Jeff suppresses this interest, insisting Miles conform to a certain image and behavior. He sends him to a school where he feels out of place, only increasing the pressure. Miles feels misunderstood and invisible, as if it's part of him remains unseen and unacknowledged. The scene where Miles and his Uncle Aaron paint together perfectly captures the sense of liberation. In the private space, away from his father's watchful eye, in the oppressive school environment, Miles is free to be himself. His art becomes a silent cry, a way to express his frustrations and yearnings for freedom from expectations. Graffiti, in particular, becomes a potent symbol of his struggle, a form of resistance and self-assertion against a system that tries to silence him. Historically, graffiti has served as a tool of rebellion, a means for marginalized voices to be seen, and Miles' use of it embodies this duality. To his father, it's disorderly and rebellious, a lack of discipline. To Miles and Aaron, it's a vital declaration of existence, a way to insert who he truly is amidst oppression. The graffiti he does with his uncle is the perfect representation of what he feels, not expectations. It's what he wishes to be free being himself. Aaron tells Miles that he used to paint with his father when they were young, but Jeff changed. Even so, he ushers Miles that his brother's a good person. Jeff is a disciplined man who firmly believes he knows what's best for his son. His strict rules and rigid approach come from a place of good intention, aiming to shield Miles and secure a better future for him. However, Aaron's story reveals that Jeff wasn't always this way. Growing up in the same neighborhood as Aaron, he lacked direction until a pivotal moment, Miles' birth. It prompted him to make a drastic change. He abandoned uncertainty for structure, discipline, discipline, and safety, ultimately becoming a police officer, a role that aligns with a strict parenting style. Jeff's goal is for Miles to escape their rough neighborhood, to access opportunities he never had, which is why he emphasizes the importance of attending a prestigious school. He hopes Miles won't follow the same troubled path as Aaron, or even himself. Yet, his well-meaning efforts end up stifling Miles, forcing a predetermined route on him instead of allowing him to explore his own identity. In his desire to protect, Jeff inadvertently stripes Miles of the freedom to discover who he truly is. Miles feels misunderstood and unheard by his father, unlike with his uncle Aaron, where he can be himself. Their relationship grows strained. The more Jeff pushes, the more Miles feels distant and feels like he's failing to meet his father's expectations. As he finishes his painting, a spider appears, and after taking a picture of it, it bites him. At that moment, the spider grants him Spider-Man's incredible abilities. He's not aware of this, as he doesn't feel intense pain or experience any immediate symptoms. The next day, Miles wakes up and realizes his pants no longer fit. He finds the situation quite strange, and he can't help but comment that he thinks he's reached puberty. After a rather awkward encounter with Gwen, Miles tries to make things right with the rabbit his uncle gave him. He places his hand on the girl's shoulder and says, "Hey." However, his hand gets caught in Gwen's hair, and after a struggle in front of the whole school, this whole mess results in her having to shave one side of her head. As Miles leaves the infirmary, all other students watch him, trying to calm down. He tells them that no one knows what happened, but he soon realizes that everyone is aware of the situation, and runs out, until the head of security stops him from leaving the dorm that night before. To avoid trouble, he runs away, but ends up hiding in a guard's office. Nervous tries to leave, but his hands stick to the walls, and in chaos, he wrecks the place before escaping. Walking along the wall, Gwen sees him as he tries to get back to his room. Later, Miles finds a Spider-Man comic and begins to suspect that the spider that bit him gave him powers. Scared, he tries to call his Uncle Aaron because he gives Miles space where he doesn't feel judged, and if he makes a mistake, this allows him to trust his uncle, not his parents. But there's no answer. He calls his dad but changes his mind and hangs up. Miles immediately heads to the abandoned subway station, where he was bitten by the spider and begins to experience his spider sense for the first time. Peeking out to see what's happening, he witnesses an intense fight between Spider-Man and considerably a larger version of the Green Goblin. Just as he's about to leave, he discovers a strange machine that piques his curiosity. However, he loses his balance and falls, but Spider-Man manages to save him at the last second. Spider-Man senses that Miles also shares his gifts, as they both possess the Spider-Man sense. Miles, somewhat reluctantly, tells him he doesn't want to be like him, to which Spider-Man replies that he has no other choice. He then offers his help and assures him that if he waits, he will teach him everything he knows. He just has to destroy that machine to prevent the space-time continuum from collapsing. Miles hesitates about helping him, but in the end decides to stay hidden. With that warning, Spider-Man leaves to save the multiverse. However, he is soon attacked by the Prowler, who along with Green Goblin manages to subdue Spider-Man. At that critical moment, Kingpin, the mastermind behind this chaotic situation, appears. For reasons unknown, he wants to activate a machine capable of opening portals to other universes. When he finally manages to turn it on, Spider-Man falls into the center, and the machine malfunctions in a devastating explosion. After the explosion, Spider-Man is critically injured and hands Miles a USB drive with the precise instructions. He must reach the top, insert the device, and press the green button to stop the machine. He then instructs Miles to cover his face and not reveal his identity to anyone. It is an imperative that his secret remains hidden. He warns Miles that if the machine is activated again, everything he knows will end. Shortly after, Kingpin arrives, and Spider-Man argues that the risk isn't worth it, as the machine has potential to open a black hole in Brooklyn. Kingpin replies that it's not always about the money. At that moment, Spider-Man asks if he isn't curious to discover what's inside the machine. He tells him that it won't work, and that they're gone. This frustrates Kingpin, who finishes him off with a single blow, thus killing Peter Parker. Miles makes a noise, and the Prowler pursues him. Terrified, Miles runs through the streets and manages to escape. Still shaken, he returns home and hugs his father. He can't tell him what happened. He only asks to stay that night instead of going back to the residence. Jeff hesitates, but his mother notices something is wrong and convinces him to let him stay. Before going to sleep, Miles asks his mother if she's ever thought about moving from Brooklyn. She replies that her family doesn't run away from problems. Later, Miles' parents see on the news that Spider-Man has died. It is shown how everyone in the city is stunned and moved by this tragic news. The next morning, he buys a Spider-Man costume and goes to Mary Jane's speech honoring her husband. She recounts how Peter used to say that anyone could be behind the mask, that he was just a kid bitten by a spider, that didn't choose his powers, but he did choose to be Spider-Man. What she admired about him was that he made others feel powerful, because in a way, everyone could be Spider-Man. Motivated, Miles decides to become the new Spider-Man. He reads several comics to learn how to imitate Peter and climbs to the roof of the building to train. But when he sees how high it is, he gets scared and decides to try from a lower place. When he jumps, he has an accident and discovers that the key to destroy the collider has broken. This puts even more pressure on Miles, because in addition to being a great student, he now has to fill the shoes of New York's most iconic superhero. These are shoes that are too big for him, and he doesn't think he can fill them. That night, he goes to Peter Parker's grave to apologize, feeling unable to fulfill his mission. At that moment, a mysterious man approaches him, and when Miles touches him, he unintentionally repels him. When the man falls unconscious, Miles notices that he has a web shooter, and soon discovers that it is another Spider-Man, Peter B. Parker. This mysterious individual tells a story, how he saved the city, fell in love, and got married. However, his marriage faced difficulties, and he made poor financial decisions. And the fact that he didn't feel ready to have kids led to their separation. He also lost his Aunt May. Despite handling the situation bravely, he actually sank into depression. One quiet day, while enjoying a pizza in bed, a multiverse portal opened the ceiling and sucked him in, transporting him to Miles' universe. It's truly curious to see this defeated Spider-Man, downcast and out of shape. He's the very embodiment of failure. Let's look how this character introduction is very different from the Spider-Man we all know. The Peter Parker who was introduced at the beginning, who sadly died, red is a color that symbolizes strength, emotion, passion, and power. His suit has been red since the comics, but it's not just red that's important. Throughout his introduction, red and blue are always present, especially blue. This shot emphasizes his confidence and security, enforced by his line. The only thing that's standing between the city and destruction is me. His business card is red, representing the strength, passion, and emotional resilience he shows as Spider-Man. Interestingly, red is also linked to love, and he mentions that despite many years, he still loves being Spider-Man. In an almost grandiose shot, we see orange, which often signifies success, confidence, and love for his role as Spider-Man. Moving to Peter B. Parker, his business card is blue, which might seem to symbolize security, but that's not the main point. The scene where he's introduced contrasts a lot with the beginning of the previous Spider-Man, where blue dominates, but this scene has one key element: rain. The first Spider-Man was surrounded by vibrant blue skies, reflecting confidence and happiness. He declared that being Spider-Man was the best thing ever. In contrast, Peter B. Parker's scene features a sunset with hints of pink, symbolizing sentimentality, which here is a negative because he's talking to himself about his problems. The blue is associated with sadness. The blue tone surrounding him is duller, more muted. He is tired.
You look tired, Peter. Well, I am tired.
The blue tone tells us he's not okay. When he mentions Mary Jane, the pink sunset and the blue tones highlight his emotional conflict. The difference between the two Spider-Man is clear. One loves being Spider-Man and ends up with dominant red, symbolizing passion and confidence. The other, at the end of his scene, is dominated by blue, representing sadness and doubt. The rain in the scene further emphasizes this contrast, showing that this Peter is no longer as sure of himself as the first one was.
With great power comes
Don't
great...
you dare finish that sentence. Don't do it.
Suddenly, police officers arrive at the cemetery. Miles must flee to avoid capture. He remains connected to Peter Parker by webbing and taking him along. Surrounded by police, Miles accidentally causes Peter B to shoot his webbing at a train, dragging them through the city until the train stops and he falls under a bridge. Peter B awakens tied up inside a punching bag and is interrogated by Miles until he manages to escape. However, his body begins to collapse because his atoms are unstable in this dimension. His plan is to go to Fifth Tower to use the collider and return home. But since Miles broke the key, Peter must infiltrate Kingpin's corporation to make another one. Miles confronts him for wanting to leave without caring about the city and his family, but Peter doesn't want to get involved and leaves. Even so, Miles makes him feel guilty and convinces him to help. The next morning, after having breakfast at a cafeteria, they take a bus to Alchemax. Peter shares his plan with Miles. He'll infiltrate the lab to find the head scientist's computer, hacking it, download all the relevant information before escaping. Miles asks what his role will be in this mission. Peter tells him he'll act as a lookout, which proves crucial. But when Miles sees Kingpin arrive, he decides to follow him. Peter tells him to stay back, but Miles refuses to stand idle by. He cannot let this Spider-Man suffer the same fate as the previous one, although it gets stuck to the ceiling and makes a lot of noise. Miles discovers a new ability. He can turn turned invisible. Hearing footsteps, Peter gives him a USB drive and the password to destroy the machine. Shortly after, Olivia Octavius appears. Surprised to see him there, Peter tries to distract her so Miles can complete the mission, but the young man forgets the password and decides to take an entire computer. Just as they're about to leave, Olivia reveals herself to be Dr. Octavius. While Peter B confronts Doc Ock, Miles escapes and runs into Gwen, although he thinks that the girl hasn't recognized him. After losing Olivia, they end up in the cafeteria where the employees try to capture them. They manage to dodge the gunfire and flee into the woods using their webs. However, Miles hasn't yet mastered this ability and falls in the snow. Pursued by security, Dr. Octavius catches up to them and attacks, but he manages to escape with Peter B. During the escape, Peter's body begins to disintegrate and falls into a tree. The villain takes advantage of this to retrieve the computer, but a third superhero intervenes and defeats her. It's Gwen, who comes from another dimension and was bitten by the radioactive spider 2 years ago. She couldn't save her best friend, Peter Parker, so she decided to save others. And to avoid any pain, she decided she'll no longer have any more friends. While rescuing people, a portal took her to Miles City. Now the three flee together to a safe place. Meanwhile, Kingpin, furious about the loss of the computer, remembers the day he lost his family during a fight with Spider-Man. His wife and son arrived home, but upon seeing her husband's violence, he fled in a car and suffered a fatal accident. Now, the villain wants to open an interdimensional portal to try to unite with them in another dimension. On a bus far from Alchemex, Miles shows Gwen the broken key. She says she knows where to make another. That night, the three heroes visit Aunt May. Upon seeing Peter, she quickly realizes he's not from her universe and is willing to help them. They gain access to Spider-Man's secret base, where there's a car, a plane, and several different suits. While Peter B. Parker looks longingly at a photo, Miles is fascinated by the suits hanging on the walls. But when reflected in the mirror, we notice something curious. Miles' image appears only halfway, as if it doesn't fit him. At that moment, Aunt May reminds him that Peter was aware of the dangers involving this work. However, the only one capable of stopping Kingpin was Spider-Man. She also informs that they aren't the only Spider-Man who have came to her. There's also Spider-Man Noir, a private detective from 1933 depicted in a black and white. She mentions Penny Parker, who's from 3145 and has a psychic link with a spider living inside her father's robot. Finally, she talks about Peter Porker, a pig who was ridden by a radioactive pig and thus acquired his powers. The Spider-Man discusses how to get back home. One of them must stay behind to destroy the collider. However, Miles intervenes, determined that none of them can stay. If they remain there, they will die. He is the only one who can shut it down and send them all back before doing so, as if he's made a promise he must keep. Then, Peter tells the group that Miles has the ability to turn invisible. Upon hearing this, Miles attempts to activate his power, but fails. The others quickly notice his inexperience and begins questioning about his abilities as a Spider-Man. Despite the encouraging words about how Spider-Man always gets back up after being knocked down, Miles is unable to get up and feels he has let everyone down. In a moment of frustration and sadness, he turns invisible and walks away. Already overwhelmed by his father and school's pressure, Miles' burden only grows heavier when he takes on the role of Spider-Man and the great mission his hero left him before dying. To make matters worse, new heroes have appeared, each expecting Miles to meet their high standards. He's bombarded by voices telling him who he should be and what he should do, fueling his self-doubt. He begins to feel unprepared, inadequate, and afraid, leading him to imitate Peter Parker, thinking that copying him might help him along. But the problem is, Miles isn't Peter Parker. That's why he struggles to control his power. He's trying to squeeze into a mold that simply doesn't fit him. His store-bought, awkward costume reflects this perfectly. He doesn't fit, literally. Even his reflection in the mirror with the suit half on hints on his disconnect, caught between others' expectation and his own inability to meet them. Miles feels stuck, unsure of himself and lost in the process. He walks the streets, deeply saddened. He overhears his father's worries. His father tells him he knows nothing about him and asks what's happening. Later, Miles decides to go to his uncle Aaron's house. However, not finding him there, he writes him a letter expressing his need to do something important, but confessing that he feels scared and unable to live up to others' expectations. At that moment, the Prowler appears. Miles panics and hides. To avoid being seen, he activates his invisibility. In that crucial moment, the Prowler receives a phone call. It removes his mask. The most shocking revelation comes when Miles discovers that the Prowler is his beloved Uncle Aaron. Still invisible, he tries to flee, but Aaron chases him on a motorcycle, causing an accident. Even so, Miles manages to escape and is terrified. Miles, in addition to his father, had his uncle, who in one way or another was also a father figure, but whose lifestyle didn't support his brother. Despite this, Miles trusted someone who showed up a way of life more than anyone who gave it to him. Teenagers and young adults commonly tend to follow their path with guides who may or may not be morally acceptable. This applied to Miles, as he was initially unconsciously destined to become someone like his uncle, who, as we know, was a villain Spider-Man constantly had to fight. It wasn't until Miles and Peter met that a turning point occurred in the young man's life. His destiny, uncertain until that very moment, was radically transformed from this first glimpse, in which Miles embarked on a journey of learning and self-discovery. Ultimately, the connection with Peter awakened in Miles a deep motivation to follow his father's legacy. The path wouldn't be easy, but Miles would be willing to face the challenges. While Penny continues working on the nearly finished USB drive, she heads over to Peter to give it to him. While Spider-Man Noir plays with a cube he finds extremely interesting, at that moment, Gwen asks Peter about Miles, to which he replies that he's simply gone out to clear his head. Peter already knows Miles and is convinced he has what it takes. He even dares to bet that he'll return through that door refreshed and ready for battle. Just then, Miles makes his entrance and informs everyone that his Uncle Aaron is the Prowler, who works for Kingpin, and has tried to kill him. They ask him if anyone has followed him, and he replies no. However, suddenly, his spider sense activates, and Doc Ock appears starting an intense fight against all the Spider-Men. Faced with the situation, Aunt May strongly urges them to move outside to fight. The villains arrive and an intense battle begins to wreak havoc. In the midst of the chaos, the Prowler appears, pursuing Miles because of the USB drive he's carrying. Just as about to finish him off, Miles turns his mask around, revealing his true identity. Aaron is shocked to recognize him, while Kingpin on the phone tells him he's eager to finish him. However, Aaron decides to free Miles right then and there, causing Kingpin to shoot him. Miles takes his uncle away, tears streaming down his face, blaming himself for what happened. Aaron apologizes, telling him he's the best of all of them, and then he dies. Aaron's double life as the Prowler had collapsed. He had been able to separate his caring uncle side from his ruthless criminal persona, but when he realized he might hurt his loved one, everything shattered. In that moment, he chose not to obey, refusing to hurt Miles, and died. His last message: keep going, urge others to not repeat his mistake, to forge their own paths. It showed that even when it seems like there's no choice, deep down, we always have one. Suddenly, Jeff arrives in his car and tries to arrest Miles. Unaware that he is his son, Miles uses invisibility to escape. Upon seeing his brother's body, Jeff feels an immense grief and believes that new Spider-Man is responsible. Aaron's death marks a turning point for Jeff. Although never explicitly stated, the film suggests he always knew, or at least suspected, that his brother was leading a double life. Finding him dead confronted him with a profound loss, and simultaneously an even greater fear that Miles might be in a danger, or worse, that he might follow the same path. Jeff doesn't want to lose anyone else. Later, Miles and his mates arrive at a dorm room. There, they try to comfort him over the loss of his uncle. Miles confesses that he feels guilt about what happened. However, Gwen tells him that they are the only ones who truly understand his pain. Peter turns to Miles and tells him he must stay behind while they go to face the fight. He will be the one to close the portal. Miles expresses his desire to do it, stating that he cannot be replaced, since staying put risks his own death, and therefore he must return to his own universe. Peter asks him to hand over the USB drive, but Miles insists that he needs to tell the others that he can do it. He must make Kingpin pay for his actions. He ensures him that he is ready. Peter replies that he must prove it, and asks him to turn invisible whenever he wants, but Miles cannot do it at that moment. Peter webs him into a chair and leaves him there. Miles asks, how will he know when he's ready? Peter replies that he doesn't have a definitive answer. It's just a leap of faith. With that, he leaves, leaving Miles to reflect his situation. Throughout the film, despite the camouflage that makes him invisible to thousands, the only one with the power to see him is his own uncle. It's a narrative association that even works visually. He has always seen him, and as he dies, it's his uncle who is the first to tell him that he has faith in him. The rest of the Spider-Man doesn't trust his abilities or his powers. They decide to get rid of him and tie him to a chair because they consider him a burden. Words of the aged Peter Parker, even though they are farewell, are what encourage him to take the step he will take next. But to take this leap, an important piece is needed: his father. While trying to break free, Miles receives a visit from his father, who, from the other side of the door, tells him he doesn't want him to drift apart. Jeff recognizes that he sees great potential in his son. He sees that he has a great spark, but he was diverting that spark from something he wanted. But that spark belongs to Miles, and whatever he decides to do with it will be for the best. Jeff gives Miles free rein to unleash his potential as he pleases. Miles understands he doesn't have to be the student his father wants him to be. He doesn't have to be like Peter Parker or Gwen Stacy. He can be the Spider-Man he decides to be. But when will he be ready? To know the exact moment when he can unleash it, all he needs to do is a leap of faith. After telling him he loves him, he leaves, and Miles decides it's time to master his powers. At that moment, finally, he's freed, both literally and metaphorically. The film masterfully depicts this with a visual metaphor. He got rid of the webs that held him captive. Those cobwebs represent all the expectations that had imprisoned him. Those of his father, those of the school, and those of the Spider-Man. Miles goes to Aunt May's shed to choose his suit. This time we see how his face is reflected, aligned with Spider-Man's mask. He takes the original suit and customizes it with black graffiti. It's no longer a costume with the graffiti colors, a suit that fits him perfectly and is also covered in graffiti as if it were saying, "This is Spider-Man, but it's my version of Spider-Man. It's my own voice." Because his story was never about becoming Peter Parker, but about discovering how to be Miles Morales. And now when he looked in the reflection, his face finally fit the Spider-Man suit. He climbs the biggest building of the city, ready to take the leap of faith. This entire sequence is spectacular throughout the film. We see how Spider-Man's colors haunt Miles, like in that cemetery sequence where Spider-Man Red isn't welcoming but terrifying and threatening. The blue that Miles tries to distance himself from, which terrifies him because it reminds him of the loneliness and sadness. It's what floods all of New York. For the first time, he understands that fear is never conquered, that adrenaline is part of being Spider-Man, and that being that hero means perpetually traveling without a seatbelt. That's the curse, but also the blessing of being Spider-Man. With the ankle shots, we see Miles' fear, but then he jumps and we see a close-up of the glass shattering, showing not only the force of the jump, but also how tightly Miles was gripping the windows. In a previous scene, they showed us that when Miles is nervous, he involuntarily clings to things. And to detach himself, Peter told him that he needs to relax. The moment Miles jumps from the building, he's not relaxed. He's tense, nervous, and afraid, yet he jumps. He takes the leap of faith even though he's afraid to do it. Miles is falling into the void and flipping off the camera, perpendicularly symbolizing his ascent. Miles had been doubting himself, wondering if he's truly enough. This insecurity prevented him from fully letting go. As a result, he couldn't control his powers. That's how the fear of the unknown works. The fear of leaving our comfort zone. We always want certainty before acting. We want guarantees that we're ready, that that moment is right. But the reality is that the perfect moment never arrives. There will always be doubt. What if I'm not prepared? A fear that makes us stop. And that's where the idea of the leap of faith comes in. The only way to know if you're ready is by trying. Miles finally made the decision and literally threw himself into the void. In that scene, the film did something brilliant. Before, every time Mick tried to jump from a building, the camera showed him falling, making it clear that he wasn't ready yet. But this time, when he finally dared, the perspective was reversed. He wasn't failing. He was ascending. It wasn't the leap of someone who was afraid of failing. It was the leap of someone who chose to trust himself. And that trust changed everything. He fearfully shoots his web, but then he gains confidence. Finally, he's become Spider-Man. Not just any Spider-Man, but his own version. We notice that he uses elements of parkour to swing through the city, and now he wears his own costume-made suit. Now, Miles stops running from his problems and becomes the best version of himself. Because that's the life. We'll never know for sure if we're ready for something. We'll never have absolute certainty that we'll achieve it. But if we don't dare to take that leap, if we don't face the possibility of failure, we'll never reach our true potential. The Spider-Man that arrives at Kingpin's penthouse infiltrates an event and is sent into the basement to stop him. Just as Peter is about to plug in the USB drive, Doc Ock appears and stops him. However, at that precise moment, Miles bursts into the scene, throwing punches for Doc Ock, which starts an intense fight. Unfortunately, Penny's spider robot is destroyed in battle. Meanwhile, Porker manages to defeat Scorpion. Miles joins the fight and helps defeat Octavius, Scorpion, and Tombstone, thus thwarting Kingpin's evil plan. At a crucial moment, Miles activates the drive and sends the Spider-Man back home just before Kingpin arrives. Only Peter remains, and he must leave. However, Kingpin appears before him. Peter tells Miles to close the portal, stating that he will be the one to stop the villain, almost as if he didn't want to turn to his sad reality. Despite this, Miles manages to push Peter away, and it says he must return. Peter's unsure whether he will ruin these things by going back. Out of fear and lack of faith, chooses to sacrifice himself, but Miles reminds him that he will never know because it's a leap of faith. So Peter trusts him and drops him to the portal. When we first encountered Peter B, instead of the confident Spider-Man we knew, he appeared as a worn-down, cynical man, lost in an internal struggle. His depression stemmed not from his doubt, but from his fear of becoming a father, a responsibility so immense that it made him want to escape. Like many who were overwhelmed by duty, he surrendered, grew indifferent, neglected himself both physical and emotionally, and lost faith in the hero he once aspired to be. Then Miles appeared. Initially, Peter saw him as a burden, an obstacle on his own way home, not expecting to become a mentor. Yet gradually, unintentionally, Miles rekindled him a sense of hope, desire to believe again in what he thought was lost. In many ways, Miles became the son Peter B never had, someone who looked up to him, wanted to learn, and saw qualities in him that had forgotten himself without realizing it. Peter started to accept his role as a father figure, something he had long feared. He guided Miles in mastering his powers, but perhaps the most vital lesson was about taking a leap of faith. Ironically, Peter believed he was teaching Miles something crucial at that moment, unaware that the same advice is what he desperately needed. Watching Miles evolve from an awkward, inexperienced kid into a true Spider-Man, partly inspired by him, made Peter realize that he too required a leap of faith. He understood that the fear of responsibility never truly vanishes, and that there are no guarantees everything will work out. The only choice is to trust oneself and take that step. Just as Miles had to trust himself to jump and become Spider-Man, Peter had to trust himself enough to face his fears about becoming a father and reconnecting with Mary Jane. And in the end, he did. Now only Miles remains, facing Kingpin, and the ensuing fight is truly amazing. In the middle of the battle, they find themselves on a train. Suddenly, Kingpin sees his wife and son watching him, who are also witnessing the confrontation, and are scared of the man he's become, so they run away in fear. Desperate, Kingpin yells at them not to leave, feeling a deep sadness consuming him. This anguish enrages him even more, and with all his might, he strikes Miles, blaming him for taking his family away. However, in the midst of adversity, Miles spots his father in the distance, who encourages him to get up. Fueled by his father's support, Miles gets back to his feet and executes the shoulder trick, managing to deliver an electric shock to Kingpin. This impact is so powerful that Kingpin is launched into the air, landing near the goober. When Miles completes his mission, he calls his father, takes off his mask and tells him he's sorry about his uncle's death. Jeff already knows Spider-Man wasn't responsible. Then he suggests finding a wall for Miles to paint his art. Miles hangs up the phone, puts on his mask, and goes to talk to his father as a Spider-Man. He hugs him and says he hopes to work with him again. Jeff replies that he hopes so too, even though he doesn't approve of his methods, but they'll have to accept their differences. Before leaving, Spider-Man warns him that the criminal he's looking for is right behind him, Kingpin trapped in his webs. 2 days later, Miles finishes his mission, saves many people, and paints a mural in his uncle's honor alongside his father. Meanwhile, Peter Parker decides to look for Mary Jane to try again. The film's message is that anyone can wear the mask, because everyone has their own unique mask. We don't need to try to fit in someone else's. Although this can sometimes be scary, the heroes are those who, even when frightened, decide to take the leap of faith.